welcome. I'm so glad to have you back. It just makes it really fabulous. And to introduce our illustrious speaker, Jeff.
All right, let's make it short, quick.
This is very short. Hi, I'm Jeff Siegel. I'm here to welcome, introduce all. Usually, cases like this, you have a long list of achievements and so forth. 3 pages, I'm not going to use it. Why? Everyone knows Saul. Undergrad, no one as a great teacher, able administrator, and good friend. The older alums known from speaking at many events, at alumni events, and so forth, and achievement, and many honorary degrees and so forth. But he's still waiting for the big induction into the Hall of Fame as a second baseman for the New York Yankees.
All right, wait a minute, I'm going to leave that down like that so you can see better, all right? Can I see well? I don't need that. I got something already going to me. You know, it's interesting. It dawned on me, in 2 years, I stopped teaching undergraduates. So in 2 years, it's going to be Saul who? They won't know me at all on this campus. This is my clientele. This is it. And it's interesting. You know, it's interesting with a faculty member when you realize the kids on campus, they're here 4 years. So I didn't teach last year. I had some seniors graduating this year. There may be a few more kids in the next class, and then it's it. Then it's strictly, I mean, I have people coming up to me who work here saying, we just got a check in the mail dedicated to somebody named Seymour Simchis. Do you know who he is? I say, Seymour was a giant around here, but everything is ephemeral. Life is short and it's ephemeral. Oh yeah, and but it's less ephemeral because you're around and I got an audience still. It's also interesting. For 60 years, I haven't gotten to the topic yet. I will in a minute. In 60 years, I taught people younger than I am, and that's now over with. And I'm realizing that it's in a way it's better for me because they still think of it as graduation, and you learned what it really is. It's commencement. It's the beginning because you are still involved in lifelong learning. They don't know that. They think they're immortal. They think, they still see pediatricians, for God's sake. They're kids. Nothing changes. You were just like the way they were when you were here. Believe me, nothing changes. The only thing that changes is technology. That's the only, nothing else. Human nature doesn't change. They do the same stupid things. They say it's smart. The only thing that changes is really this thing that's called technology. And the technology is what drives this whole thing forward. You need to continue. It's got to be lifelong learning after college or you're doomed. I mean, those of you that are medical doctors or technicians of any kind in the audience, for MDs, 90% of the basic biomedical discoveries since the beginning of civilization have taken place in our lifetime. Can you believe that? So if you don't have continuing education, you're doomed. And that goes also for technicians, for dentists, veterinarians, computer scientists, where there's no computers. So all of this, you have to keep going. People keep arguing now, major in economics, major in business. Let me tell you something. If you don't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia, you're lost in this world. So you better understand that history, if I could press the button, I'd have every one of you be at least a history minor. Don't ever tell me, I have no time for that. Engineering is more important. Medicine, economics, whatever. You better know the history of the world around you, because if you don't, you're in trouble. We just came back from London, a London alumni meeting. There are 500 Tufts graduates in the London area. 250 showed up. They wanted me to talk about 200 years since the Battle of Waterloo. I said, great. I said, you know what you need to know to understand what happened? I said, you need to know, and I wrote down 45 different courses. Each one 13 weeks long. It's another 4 or 5 years of college that they still have. By the way, if you want that list, here's my email. If I got it, yeah, look at that. Saul.Gittleman@tufts.edu. Try to remember that and write it, and all you are is a mouse click away from me. For those of you I haven't seen you in 30 or 40 years, it's your own damn fault. We have been available on any faculty member that you want. if he's still above ground or she's still around, is available through this lousy little mouse. So stay in touch. This group is going to be too big to put on one server, the 2,000, but we don't know who the names are. But for the London thing, for Chicago, for Denver, for Cape Cod, for Boston, I can put you all on one server I have and send them things, articles, this, that. If you want this list of 45 courses that you should be taking and find out which one you really want, maybe pick your 5 favorite and get some bibliography, continue studying about it, continue reading, send me an email and I'll attach it and send you back the course list that I gave to these kids in London, 45 different courses that would be helpful. Very interesting. You know, you need to know comparative religion. Today, if you don't know Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you're lost. And then you'd have to know what's inside each of them. You have to know why Muslims are killing Muslims, why Christians have killed Christians, why Jews don't do that in number, because there aren't enough of them. And that's a fact. You have to know that there are 2.3 billion Christians in the world, 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, and 14 million Jews. That's not enough to do damage internally, and they haven't figured it out. But over the course of the 6,000 years of world history, more Christians have killed Christians, more Muslims have killed Muslims than anything else. They fight internally. That gets us to where we are, all right? Technology. Technology, some of you I said this to some of you if you're local people. In 1450, there were 100,000 manuscripts in Europe, all beautifully illuminated, all written meticulously and colored and gorgeous and beautiful. You've seen some in the museums. 1450. By 1500, there were 9 million books. That's 50 years and one technology. One. Which one? Movable type. I mean, when Luther, any Lutherans in the group, when October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther nails 95 complaints against the Catholic Church on the door of his bulletin board, which is University of Wittenberg church door. There's bulletin notes all over the place, and many of them blow away. After 3 days, your bulletin was gone, your note was gone, his complaint would have been gone. One of his students takes it off the door, takes it to the local ironmonger, who had just gotten a new piece of equipment, a movable type machine, runs off 100 copies. Another one of his students runs off 100 copies. Another one runs. What do you got? The Protestant Reformation. And 100 years later, you got the 30 Years' War, where Catholics are killing Protestants in massive numbers. And you got horror, bloodshed, and misery because of one technology. You also have schism within the Christian church. But that was a Christians versus Christian, one technology. Where our technology today is going, we have no idea. The only thing we're certain of is in the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, and the Quran, the world was destroyed. How? By miracle the first time. For those of you who are people of faith, it's another thing. A lot of people of faith here, a lot of people who are not people of faith. Many people of faith, others atheists, whatever. None of my business, none of your business. But if you're people of faith, and even if you're not a person of faith, know what these books say. Because the world was destroyed how? By flood. And that took a miracle. It took whose intervention? God's intervention to destroy the world by flood. Each of those 3 books predicts that the world will be destroyed again. How? By fire. We have the capacity to do that ourselves. We have the thermonuclear capacity to destroy the world. So it won't require a miracle. One of the 45 courses was understand the religions of Abraham, understand millennialism, understand the way the world operates in 1,000-year periods. So anyway, if you want a copy of these 45 courses that you can start studying right now, just send me an email. Okay, let's get going. Getting to the White House, God, immigration, race, and the American voter. Some things never change. Now, if I say something that you don't like, hold on to it, or you want to raise your hand, you can do that too. But I'll try to keep my opinions out of this. All I'm trying to do is state the facts as I see them and as they were. And some things that, I got to click the right button. Every one of these, this is what it was in the beginning. And every one of them goes back at the most 3 or 4 generations until some wretched, miserable person. For the Clintons, it was a dirt poor Scotch-Irish Presbyterians. For everybody else, could be Latinos, it could be anything. Could be Carson's had slaves in his family. Trump's mother comes from Scotland. Every one of these people has an immigrant root. They come from some immigrant background. How they then evolve and develop their own political ideology is their own business. But America is a country of immigrants and generally a country of first-time losers. Very few people come to this country because they're doing terrific somewhere else. They come here, whatever they've told you, whatever your grandparents or your grandmother, I was a very successful mason in northern Italy or southern Italy, forget about it. You know, you can find out what the truth was in all of these people, then you come to this country. If you don't fall through the safety net, which is not tightly woven anyway, and you don't disappear, and hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans who came here just disappeared, vanished. And then others make it because it's survival of the fittest. It's a country that does it. And these people, how many of you are not born in the United States? Raise your hands. Not born. Not 2%, 3%, 4%. How many of you, keep your hands up. How many of you have one parent not born in the United States? We got about 10, 15%. Keep those hands up. How many of you have one grandparent, at least one, not born? Oh, we got about half. How many, one great-grandparent? Yeah. How many hands am I eventually going to get up? Unless I got a Wampanoag, an Iroquois, somebody here. Unless we got a Native American, it's going to be whose hands? Everybody. And the audience is overwhelmingly white, with occasionally a little bit of mixture of black, maybe some red, yellow, and brown. So we have color, and but this country was built and constructed for white, Protestant, landowning males. That's what's embedded in the Constitution, and that's the way it was. And it started. Coming to America, we're going to start in 1620. We'll leave Jamestown out of it. We'll start in the north, we'll start up here. So be like, my thesis is, and you can argue about this if you want, it's never been hospitable. It's never been a country where people came and said, we love you, we welcome you. In America, it was always, I'm in, and I don't want the next boatload to be any different than I am. Be like us or else. And that has been a motto that you can see and a theme that developed all through the history of the United States, or America, and then the United States as it evolved. Here they are, 1620. The Pilgrims seek religious freedom in the New World. They came in 1620. For those of us who took a little bit of history, 17th century, why did they come? You know, they were, what were they? Dissident, what do we call them? Dissident Protestants. There are worldwide about 6,000 Protestant sects in the world. I think there are over 1,000 in America alone. And the rest of the world has got, the Protestants multiplied like you couldn't believe. But first they broke away from the Catholic Church, and then they started breaking away from each other. And that breaking away from each other, when these people came to say they were all alike, they were dissident, they left Holland, the 30 Years' War was already ravaging Europe, Protestants were already killing Catholics, Catholics were killing Protestants, they were going to have it out to decide how Europe was going to settle this thing. Within 30 years, this is 1660, and a woman named Mary Dyer, who was English, Protestant, she happened to go into a church and she would quake in the presence of God. She was a Quaker. For those that shook in the presence of God, they were Shakers. But they were different. They had a little different they're God's. But what weren't they different? They were English, no other language. They came from the same region of southern England as the other dissidents came from. They were no different. Roger Williams, Anne Hutchinson, Mary Dyer, she came, and in 1660 she was hanged on the Boston Common. Before, she wouldn't shut up. Before they hanged her, they nailed her tongue to the roof of her mouth. Let me tell you, they were nasty. There were people on the Harvard faculty who were there on the jury. So this was Tufts didn't exist yet. You know, this was, what was America in 1660? What would you call it? It was a theocracy. What is a theocracy? It's ruled by God. It's a country ruled by God. Whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Persia, Iran fighting it out. This has been a Christian country from its very beginning, and in that beginning, it really never deviated terribly. We had some people during the writing of the Constitution that said, we're going to put something else in. The rest of the country didn't believe it. and didn't want it particularly, but people like Jefferson, people like Franklin, and a few others were deists. They believed in not having a centralized government. They believed that it was a new kind of thing, and they fought for it and got it into the Constitution. But in this country, it's always been the vast majority of teaching right through the 19th century was A is for Adam, B is for Bible, C is for Cain, D is for David, E is for Eden. It was McGuffey's Reader, and the Bible was the basic text that you had to use. Also, if you live within an hour of an ocean, you really don't know what's going on in this country. You better get into the heartland of America, get into Oklahoma, get into Missouri, Branson, Missouri, and then find out what the vast majority of your fellow co-Americans are like and what they believe. One of these things about this current election, and even the past several elections, is that you should have the realization, you should study American history as one of your 45 courses, to realize that America is a nation of deep faith. This is the only industrialized nation in the world that is a nation of faith. I mean, you go to a European church, they're not just empty, they're vacant. The Europeans are not churchgoers. No matter what surveys you read about the decline of religion in America, it isn't declining as fast as they tell you it's not declining, because Americans, organized religion is. People are finding other churches and other faiths to go. Pentecostalism is expanding. The immigrants that come in are very religious people. So this country will stay, and it'll stay a Christian country. And over 60% of the American people believe in Satan. And over 50% of the American people believe the world is 6,000 years old or less. So that's a fact. There are 1,500 Bible colleges that are accredited in this country that teach it. So if you still think you only read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times, you're lost. Get into the heartland of America and see what the country... You don't have to believe it, but you do have to understand it. And these people, it was a theocracy. There's the statue to Mary Dyer, by the way, under the Boston State House. The tree is no longer there, but she was hanged with 3 other Quakers. 4 Quakers were hanged in Massachusetts simply because they were Quakers. Protestants and Protestants versus Protestants. The American 17th century theocracy. Harvard was created exclusively for the children, parishioners, and clergy of the congregational denomination, a Protestant group. If you weren't congregational, they didn't want you around. But congregationalism split into Orthodox and very Orthodox. And some said, you're not Orthodox enough, we're going to New Haven and create a Calvinist church. And that was Yale. So Yale, they split right away. That's Cotton Mather, the whole Mather family were Yale people, and they were really, those are the people who burned the witches, hanged the witches, at Salem. They were drowning Baptists on the banks of the Charles River. If you were a Baptist and you got caught doing your rites, they drowned you. They drowned pregnant women on the banks of the Charles. So the Baptists fled. They fled to a town, they called it Providence. And they created Brown. So Brown was for the Baptists. Princeton, evangelicals are convinced that Christ was going to return to New Jersey. And they went down there and created Princeton. These were evangelical Presbyterians. Evangelical Presbyterians were passionate. They were passionate. Everybody in the country, it was like the early books of the Christian Bible. Jesus was supposed to return immediately. When these people settled in America, the promised land, they were convinced this was the land that Christ had sent them to, and it was immediately evangelical, and immediately that sense that it's time. Christ will return, and they were all getting themselves ready for this. William and Mary was for the Anglicans, and that's the way it was. So Protestantism was divisive. They came here, they were themselves breaking away, and yet they fought and battled each other. There were a few Catholics. Georgetown was the first Catholic school. They didn't want to go near a Catholic. So the Georgetown came over here. Jesuits founded Georgetown in 1798, and the handful of Catholics that came over. There were a handful of Catholics in the 17th and 18th century. They were given a bill of land to Lord Baltimore, who was the Catholic nobleman who came over here, and he named it after the last Catholic queen, Mary. So it was Maryland. He was a very liberal guy, very open guy, invited the Quakers down, invited other persecuted Protestants down. They got to be a majority by 1790, and the first thing they did was ban Catholicism. So some things just don't change. That's the way it is. Catholicism got it in the neck. Hold it, where am I? Okay, this was the period of Protestantism in America. The great Protestant surge, 1620 to 1820, the struggle over faith and language. So this is only background to understand where all of this comes from in this election cycle, because immigration is a template for everything that goes on in America. It's immigration, integration, race, Supreme Court decisions, everything that goes on, business particularly, everything is tied to immigration. So it's going to be a big issue as this political campaign goes by. So 1620 to 1820 was the great struggle over faith and language. You can only imagine if English caused you trouble. English was the common language of all of these people. If you added another foreign language into the calculus, that really brought out hate. And then nobody anticipated anything but Anglo-Saxon immigrants. The expectation was that everybody was going to be an Anglo-Saxon. They were very upset when from Europe, even though it was Western Europe, large numbers of slightly darker people who were more Saxon than Anglo started coming. And they were the Germans. The Germans are still, in spite of all the Latino immigration, the Germans are still the largest immigrant group we have in the United States. There is more German ethnicity in this group probably than any other ethnicity. There's a German everywhere. They came over consistently, and they kept coming from the 300 countries and states that were Germany. They kept pouring in. Religious conflict and language conflict. That's what you were having. The religious conflict was always overwhelmingly Protestant. The language conflict was English versus what? Besides German, what were the other languages that were in conflict? Dutch, because they settled New York, New Amsterdam, and coming down from French Canada, French. So that was it. English, German, Dutch, French. Who named the Northeast Kingdom? That's Bernie Sanders' country. It had no name. It was called the Northeast Kingdom. The English wanted to call it Green Mountain. The Germans wanted to call it Grünberg. Well, who won out? The French won out and called it Vermont. But the Germans kept coming anyway. And the Germans never stopped coming. The 1750s, this is still not the United States. This is still just an English colony. And in the 1750s, the English had a social problem. The Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, they were Irish and they were Scotch, and they were not Catholic. They were Presbyterian. They lived in the lowlands. Those became the Ulsterites eventually. They lived in the lowlands, and the farms all failed. The British came up with a social policy, lock them all up. And not only the farmers, but who else? No, farmers, the families. They locked up the women, the children, and the farmer. And they were called debtors' prisons. And like so many other social policies in various countries, prohibition or whatever, it failed. And the English wound up with hundreds of thousands of people in their jails, and they didn't know what to do with it. So they did to it what Fidel did about 20 years ago, opened up the jails and said, get on boats and go to America. What did they do? And from 1750 to roughly 1780, they went to the two great colonies that the English had, Australia and America. So they opened up the jail doors and they shoved them out. These were the most unwelcome people you could imagine. All Protestants, but they got to the 13 original colonies and they were immediately despised. Get them out of here. They didn't even let them stay overnight. They shoved them through the cities, through the towns, sent them into the country, sent them into the gaps in the water gaps, sent them into the mountains and said, you're in the mountains, you're going to stay in the mountains. In England, they had been followers of the first Protestant king and queen. After the Great Glorious Revolution, after the Stuarts were overthrown, who came to power? The Dutch, the Orange family, William and Mary. So William and Mary they were fans of William and Mary, and they were called mockingly by the Catholics, Billy's boys. And so when they came to the United States, they were given another name. They went into Appalachia, and they were called hillbillies. So they were hillbillies, and they spoke Lowland Scotch-Irish Presbyterian, Lowland Scotch-Irish dialect. That's the language they still speak today. They got inbred, they stay there. So you go into the deep, deep mountains, and that's what you'll find. You'll find them still speaking that. They're the hillbillies. Now, 1790, the first time a law was passed, now it's the United States. It's now the United States. They pass a law and say, we're closed up, we're finished, we're filled. No more. That's the end. The law of 1790 was an interesting law. It stayed on the books till 1943. And it stayed there, and it also specified at the end as a codicil. It said 14 years to be a citizen, and it was meant specifically against the Germans. Keep the Germans out. But then at the very end, they added a codicil that said no people of Asian Oriental extraction can ever become citizens of the United States. And it effectively banned Chinese and Japanese citizenship for over 100 years. I mean, it was really remarkable. It stayed on the books till 1943. So it was free. This was for free white persons only. And that law, it was the law of the land for a very, very long time. The barbarous German tongue is everywhere. That was what the guy who made the bill, he was a Connecticut congressman. And Germany was everywhere. You couldn't stop the Germans. And they did not speak English. They refused to speak English. They only spoke German. They went to Philadelphia. There's part of Philadelphia that's still called, Andy? Germantown. You got Rittenhouse Square. You got Muhlenberg College. The Germans were all over the place. The signs on the street were in German. A motion to make the University of Pennsylvania bilingual in 1791 failed by one vote, or else the second language would have been German. So the Germans had tremendous power. There were more German newspapers in Philadelphia in the 1790s than there were English newspapers. It was everywhere, the barbarous German. So it was still, and they were overwhelmingly Protestant, but they spoke German and they were swarthy. Benjamin Franklin called him, and you read his diaries, called him swarthy. Swarthy means what? One other shade. America has always been preoccupied with color. Always. It's never gone away, and it never will. Then, so they were wrong. It was supposed to be closed up, filled up, but it was. What happens? 1803, Jefferson negotiates the Louisiana Purchase. The United States expands by exponentially 2.5 times its size, and we need people again. The trouble is, Europe has run out of Protestants. Now, this is what Americans had a memory of. We don't have much memory. We are an amnesia country, and we make up our own history as we go along. But this was a memory of hatred. In fact, we just celebrated 100th anniversary 2 weeks ago, and the English didn't mention it. It was in the American newspapers a lot. 100th anniversary of what? Called the Easter Uprising. Some of you might have read about it. What was the Easter Uprising? It was in Dublin, and the Irish finally said, we're going to break away, create our own Catholic state. And what did it lead to? Approximately almost 70, 80 years of bloodshed, barbarism. But now it may be, you may be living through the period when Christians have stopped killing Christians. This may be the beginning of it. Of Christian, finally they came to a rapprochement. Jerry Adams has been allowed. They're no longer making each other miserable, and now the Christians are sort of living in harmony. There are still schisms. There's 2 schisms left. Will Protestantism and Catholicism ever come together? Who knows? Will Orthodoxy and Catholicism ever come together? What's Orthodoxy? Anybody in the church? We got any Greek Orthodox here? Oh, we got 1 or 2. Right, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Albanian Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox. There are 12 or 13 Orthodox churches that in 1054 split from Roman Catholicism. They split, excommunicated each other, and called each other the Antichrist. And that was the schism that has not yet healed, and whether that ever heals. But at least they're not killing each other anymore. But Europe runs out of Protestants, and we got memories of hatred. The Catholics coming over, the Irish are hated. Christians killing Christians. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. Here's just a little piece of the cover of C.V. Hedgewood's excellent book on the 30 Years' War. You see a priest blessing 1 or 2 people who have been hanged on this tree. Their souls have been saved. Well, that's the way it looked, really. And that went on in hundreds of trees all over. They were called hanging trees. Protestants, Catholics, and memory. And it was everything. Protestant armies would go into Catholic towns, cut off all the arms and legs of the Catholic men, float them down the river. Catholic armies would go into Protestant towns, cut off all the arms and legs of the Catholic Protestants, float them down the river. Sheer barbarism. Sheer barbarism in the name of God. So that was the memory when the Irish Catholics came over here. The Irish immigration, 1820 to roughly 1870. They were in the Boston newspapers, the broadsheets. By the way, the movable type created 2 new art forms. 2 new literary forms that didn't exist before movable type. What were they? The handbill became the newspaper, and the beautiful manuscript became the printed book. You are living through what age? The two art forms that were created by the Reformation are going away. What the book looks like with Kindle or whatever, I don't know. Newspapers, I'm begging students still to hold on to a newspaper. They read it online, we'll see what evolves. But it's interesting, 500 years later, those two new art forms, those two old art forms are morphing into something else. But here, the Irish immigrant trying to become white. In America, historically, from the 19th century on, anybody who was different was called not white. That's what Franklin dealt with them in the 18th century. The Germans were not white. New words were coming in, words like Caucasian, and what constituted the white race. And the thoughts and conversations about race became very prevalent in so-called scientific circles as what new field was beginning to emerge in the 19th century. In this period, 1820, 1870. Eugenics, the idea that you could tell intelligence from your race. And some races were born not to be intelligent. This was, I mean, for America, what was the lowest you could be? Black. The Irish were above the black, but not much. It was, if you were, I mean, what were the color issues? We'll talk about them in a second anyway, but think about it for just a second. The Irish trying to become white, they came over on what they call coffin ships. 20% of the Irish died on shipboard. Then another 10 or 20% died in the harbor, and they threw them off into the water. And the ones that got over, they came. Some of them, even in the Civil War, went from boat to battlefield. A mother would get off the boat with 10 children, the youngest being 7, 8, 9, 10, and there'd be an American mother waiting there with $300 in silver in her hand, saying, you give me 3 of your children, I'll give you $300. Why in the Civil War? Because you could buy your way out of service in the Civil War. So the mother gave them the 3 youngest kids, said they'll be the safest. And what do they do with those 3 kids? It was Battle of Gettysburg, where this became particularly harsh. What did those 3 kids do at the Battle of Gettysburg? The 3 littlest kids. What do you do with little kids? 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. They become fifers or drummers, or you put them up there, and they're in a battle, and they were dead before anybody knew it. They were dead. They went from boat to battlefield, and they were dead. And then in the second or third week in July, it was second week of July, 1863, when they posted the casualties from Gettysburg in New York City, the Irish mothers went crazy and rioted. And they burned the city down. They attacked. Who do poor people usually attack? Each other. So they attacked, they burned down black orphanages. They hanged Chinese on the street if they found them. Anybody. They just tore into the city and destroyed it till the National Guard came out and killed a lot of Irish people. But the Irish couldn't get anywhere in America. They were not considered part of the American fabric. Help wanted, no Irish need apply. You can still find signs like that around. If you weren't white, you were invisible in this country. If you weren't a male, if you were a woman, you were in pretty bad shape too. If you were black, there was slavery. Supreme Court, everybody's fighting about who's going to be, which president you're going to have so they can nominate. Supreme Court is important. It's important. It's critically important. It was critically important in 1857 when a unanimous decision from Roger Taney was written that said black people aren't full humans. Now, what does the Constitution say about the blacks? They called, in order to get distribution and the House of Representatives, the Southern congressmen insisted that they be counted. But they're the 3/5. Read your Constitution. We talk about the Constitution. You don't read it that often. It's they're 3/5 of a whole human being. And then that's how the distribution was done. So Dred Scott in 1857, you had emancipation, then Reconstruction, and that failed. Reconstruction failed, and the Jim Crow laws came, and then Plessy versus Ferguson, another Supreme Court decision, 1896, said separate but equal, and that existed until the 1960s. So this was the nature of what race was like in the United States. If you were yellow, you were involved in the building of the Great Western Railroads, and they were brought over basically as slaves by warlords. They were sold over here by Chinese warlords to American industry, used to build the Great Western Railroads in the 1860s. After we unified the country, great economic benefit. They were pulled. By 1860s, the Irish had raised themselves up to the foreman level, and they would be out there pulling Chinese up into the baskets in the high alpine passes. There are great books out there about that. Say, throw the dynamite now. They'd throw the stick, and then if the Irishman had a sense of humor or not, he'd let them down. More often than not, they were blown up there with the dynamite stick, and then the ones that survived and weren't buried along the Great Western Railroad crawled on their hands and knees to the cities of the West and formed Chinatowns. They didn't like to be with the round eyes. They wanted to stay by themselves. They thought white people smelled. They wanted to keep their laundry separate, and they created their own industry of the Chinese laundry out of that also. If you were red, you were already dead by the time the Pilgrims came. 70–80% of the Indians had already been infected with smallpox by traders that came before 1492. If you read a book called from 1491, you see already they were dying. They were in big time trouble. They had disease, futile wars, the Trail of Tears. That's Andrew Jackson in the 1820s, 1830s, decided that Florida and Georgia and Alabama was going to be white country, and we had to get rid of all the Indians because we had signed treaties with them. He created a law. He said, they're out of here. Supreme Court said, you're wrong, and you can't do it. What did Andrew Jackson say? Try and stop me. And he did it. He sent them all. Where did he send them to? Oklahoma. Well, 30% of them died on that trip also. So the red person, the yellow person, the black person, they were in big time trouble. If you were brown, you became a reluctant American in Texas and California, the Mexican War of 1846, and Manifest Destiny. The Mexican War is the only war there is no monument in Washington to. American War, we have monuments to every other war, but not the Mexican War. That was such an enormous land grab. We haven't had the nerve to put a monument up to that, but it really is one of the great. We took Florida, Mexico, we took 2/3 of Mexico, all of their ore, all of their minerals, right up to the Colorado territory. California and Texas came into the country. This was it. And Manifest Destiny. What does Manifest Destiny mean in 19th century American history? It's ours? And why? It's God's will. It's God's will. Yeah, if you were Irish Catholic, you were not part of this, and for a little bit of a while anyway, you were not white. Now, what was the meaning of Manifest Destiny? From Lewis and Clark to the Spanish-American War. When's the Spanish-American War? We take Hawaii in 1893. Spanish-American War gets us the Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico. We're living with that now, and we suddenly inherit a lot. And why did we do that? The frontier was over. The frontier had ended. What was the meaning of Manifest Destiny? So we have to know how it happened, the making of America. This is how America was put together. The original 13 colonies are here. Then we get the Treaty of Paris extended us into Indian tenure. We fought Indian wars here after 1783. Then came the Louisiana Purchase. Then came this. Then came this piece in 1818. Oregon Territory from England, Mexican secession, the Gadsden Purchase, Texas annexation, Hawaii 1898, and Alaska. That was it. We got it all and put it all together. But the country was built for whom? For the white Protestant majority and the males, particularly. And we just got it, we put it all together. I'm not about to give it back. I'm only saying, just try to understand and it's a triumphalist story. It's a great story, but it's a story of what? Of acquisition and taking. So the kids today, for all their things, they're shocked. It's like Captain Reno in Casablanca. They're shocked to hear that there was slavery in the North. Well, of course there was slavery in the North. We had everything. We had everything everywhere. And we took the country from people who were here. And that's the way we made it. Tough. We did it, and it's today. But don't be triumphalist about it. Just accept it as the way the United States was built. A unique and remarkable country, but it put it together by taking it from other people. Okay. This is the vision. A nation triumphant. This was one of the most popular lithographs in American art history. I don't know if you can see all the symbols that are here. I mean, what are they? Here she is. Buxom, beautiful, blonde-haired, carrying a book in one hand. That's probably the Bible. You probably can't see the electric wire here. It's the telegraph wire in her hand. But what are the other symbols that you got? Here's the East. This is the East. What do you got here? You got the railroad coming. Here you got the stagecoach coming. Here you got farmers. Here you got miners. Here you got Pony Express, whatever you want. Here's the telegraph. And who's running? The buffalo, the Indians, and the animals. It's the conquest of the frontier. How do we do it? And how did we do it? And this is it. The vision of a nation triumphant, to make America. So the slogans, and the fact that Americans are Americans. They love these making America great again. It's morning in America. Every politician does it. It's not just America. Churchill said every time he wakes up in the morning and sees the average intelligence of the British voter, he despairs. And then he says, but what other choices are there? Democracy is a messy, often ignorant proposition, but we are the luckiest people in the world because we're here. You might want to go somewhere else, but we made it. My parents were illiterate European immigrants. My mother never learned to read or write. So I was the first gen, and it happens in many ways only in America, and yet it's a tough proposition when you look how we acquired all of this. Here's Promontory Point, 1869, the joining of the Great Western Railroad. From sea to shining sea, God shed his light on thee. That's what they did. In this picture, it's all white people at Promontory. No, this is an actual picture from 1869. They weren't the ones who built the railroad. If you saw Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles, Brooks knew a little bit, except the Indians didn't speak Yiddish. But it were the white, freed whites, Irish whites, Indian, they were the ones who built it. Freed blacks, Chinese, and Irish laborers built the Great Western Railroad. Here's a reenactment in 1969. At least they put two black faces up here. Here's two black guys up there. No Chinese yet. No Asians who were the ones who actually built it. So that was a reenactment. 1969, we were not quite where we wanted to be yet. Now, that's the 19th century. America maintained its immigrant pouring in. Chicago was the second largest Polish-speaking country in the world. It was the second largest Slavic-speaking country in the world. There were more foreign language newspapers published between sea and shining sea. It was enormous. We had an enormous number of people speaking every other language under the sun. We were a country where immigrants were still pouring in the 1840s, 50s, 60s, 70s, Catholic and Protestant, 70s, 80s. Industry kept going. How did capitalism feel about immigration? What's the most powerful voice of the Republican Party for pro-immigration? It's the Wall Street Journal. They want immigration. Wall Street Journal is a pro-immigration. They show you a picture of pears rotting on the floor of the Imperial Valley, and the subtitle is, "Enough said." We gotta have cheap labor. We gotta have. America has lived and grown and done everything because of cheap labor. The argument on the other hand is, you're taking away jobs from somebody else. Whatever. I don't know the answer to that argument, but cheap labor has been the engine of America for many, many years, and the last massive immigration wave of the 19th century lasted from 1880 to 1920, and they were two more, quote unquote, non-white peoples, the Jews and the Italians. By this time, eugenics had taken over the American university. You can Google eugenics on a Google search at Harvard and found 220,000 references to eugenics at Harvard, either in courses or in publications or in testimony before Congress by Harvard faculty. Harvard was the center of eugenics, along with MIT and Johns Hopkins. To our credit, I did a search of the word eugenics in our archives, and I only found one reference. So nobody at Tufts was doing anything with eugenics. I was very happy about that. One reference, and that was medical school. So nobody in the arts and sciences was doing anything. We weren't teaching courses in eugenics, but every other university in the West End, and it was getting that way. The big new public universities were created 1862. The private universities came with all the money from from wealth, Rockefeller, Carnegie Mellon, Vanderbilt, Stanford. All of that money was pouring in, Cornell, in creating these great American universities. Eugenics was the center of it, and they didn't want these other people coming in. So this was the last two non-white people coming in. In Eastern Europe, the Jews first. Tsarist May laws of 1881. It was time to leave the shtetl. Who are these Jews in Eastern Europe? America had about 100,000 Jews already in the 1880s. I had about 100,000 Jews. Who were they? From 1840 to 1860, about 60, 70, 80,000 came in. They had a kid. Some of them had children who stayed Jews. The vast majority became Episcopalians. They couldn't wait to love this country because America early on showed a capacity to do what? We have no idea how we did it. But you could come in here and assimilate, disappear, whatever it was. Whether they weren't doing those jobs yet, but you could learn English. You could learn English and go out west and disappear and change your name. And you became, so August Schoenberg, this German Jew, came to this country. August Schoenberg, within one generation, he was August Schoenberg, Pretty Mountain. He didn't go English, he went French. Belmont, August Belmont, noted Episcopalian. So all of these people came, the German Jews, and they were making it in America. They were businessmen, they were bankers, they did it all. Everything was working fine. 1880, East European Jews start coming in. They're dirty, smelly, Hasidic, pious, awful. And the German Jews are horrified and do everything they can to keep them from coming in. They create a language. They want the restrictive immigration laws. But the East European Jews are coming because they are really miserable. Their life has fallen apart completely. The Tsar was a bad Tsar, Alexander III. Life was really miserable. Pogroms, dead children all over the place. By 1905, the Jewish shtetls are just being destroyed, and Jewish kids. So the parents it took you $10, $15. Enough of the shtetl. Getting ready to leave. It was mud. You know, people say they romanticized. Everybody had silk shirts and danced with bottles on their head. No. It was filthy, diseased, fanatic, pious, superstitious, stupid, ignorant, and the people said, it's enough. Those that were willing to get out, others wanted to stay. Who wanted to stay behind? Those who had took the course. Who wouldn't go? Tradition! Tevye didn't want to go. Two of Tevye's daughters discover who? Karl Marx. And we're out of here. One marries a Jewish communist, the other marries a Gentile communist. Oy! So Shulam Aleichem is writing about it already, but Shulam Aleichem himself is very secular. So the world is falling apart. Enough. Get out. Mud, dirt, filth. Get the hell out. So you leave the Pale of settlements where the Jews had been limited to where they could live. You walk across Europe and you get out. You got to a ship. My mother never knew what harbor she was at. All she knew is she got on a boat. She was 2 weeks without seeing the sky, and she had just enough room for her head to go to the deck. She was not in a deck. She was not in a deck. My mother was not first class, second class, third class. She was steerage. What is the German word for steerage, or the Yiddish word? Zwischendeck. What does it mean? Zwischen, between decks. They were between the decks. They found a little space between the decks and stuck the thousands and thousands of people in. They only paid $10 or $15 to go, so you could get out. The same thing happened in Italy. Fleeing Italy, poverty from 1880 on. These were people from the south, mostly from Naples and south of Rome. And you're talking about the German Jews hated the East European Jews. There was a story in the New York Times about 5 years ago about the European Union. And they asked a southern Italian peasant what he thought about the European Union. His answer was, European Union, I hate the people in the next village. It takes so little to get somebody to hate somebody else. You know, it's what Freud called the narcissism of minor difference. Freud knew it. Freud saw this. He was wrong on so many things, but on that thing, Freud was right. The narcissism of minor difference. Look that one up, and that's a goodie. Because now, you get those two southern peasants who hate each other, get them together. Who do they hate together? The Romans. They hate then you get anybody from Rome, all of southern Italy together. Who do they hate? The northern Italians. You get all the Italians together. Who do they hate? The Austrians and the Tyrol. They hate them. So you can find ways. It's like Yugoslavia. The Serbians and the Croatians killed each other till they stopped killing each other and killed Bosnians. So that's the way. So the Italians were fleeing, ready to come over, ready to get out. Steerage, sailing from Naples, steerage class to America, $15 in 1890. They lived this, but the children, nobody gave them food. They had to bring their own food with them. Occasionally, Italian steerage passengers could get on the deck. They let the women up, 1880. They don't look that happy, but they're up on the deck anyway, getting some air. Italian steerage class ready for Ellis Island, 1892. Ellis Island was opened in 1892 because they couldn't handle. Why did they have so many immigrants coming in? What was the industry that was the newest industry in America, and particularly in the cities? Textiles. What was the textiles for? What do we call it? My father always called it the schmata business. Rags. But it was garment. It was ready-made clothing for poor people. Ready-made. You made a belt, you made a shirt. All family got together, made a pair of pants, a cuff, a zipper. You put it all together. Everybody worked together. The next thing you know, you had Barney's of Boys Town or something like that. And the Italians and the Jews, everybody had at least what? A needle, maybe a thimble, a needle, and a roll of thread. And off they came, and they came in America and made business. Entering New York Harbor, but it was never welcomed. You know, Emma Lazarus, the words are there, the statue is there, but you were never welcomed. You were pooey. You know, you got there and you had to survive. You had opportunity and you could make it. Ellis Island, 1892. It's now a great museum with a great electronic database. Arriving at Ellis Island, 1895, people coming on, they couldn't speak English, they didn't know anything. Italian family arriving, great pictures that are available from the time. Italian immigrant family arriving without a father. Little Israel, the Jews and the Italians were both hated. They had the same claim. The German Jews hated them, and the Protestants hated them both. And the Irish wanted to, did the Irish welcome the Italians? Forget it. You know, they want nothing to do with them. They hated them. And so they were Jews and the Italians were shoved together in what they call Little Italy and Little Israel. And this is where they made their lives. This is how it all happened. It was filthy, dirty, horses blowing up on the street in the winter, summertime. It was the most miserable life you could imagine. Abandoned Jewish children, 1893, is a picture by Jacob Riis, great photographer. There were more Jewish orphanages than any other orphanages. The Jews abandoned their children more than anybody else. They were poorer, they were wretched, they were terrible. There were more Jewish bordellos on the Lower East Side of New York than any other. Friday night, they shut down. Saturday night, they opened up. But they were in business. Allen Street was the Jewish red light district. And lost children. So these kids, these were abandoned Jewish children. So you know, Jews have always been people of the book. We create our own history, and we create a history that doesn't account for the fact that Jewish prostitution was rampant all over New York City from the 1880s to the 1920s at least. Italian husbands, no wives. They came over single. Their wives had run away. They were left alone. They lived in filth and misery. Again, Jacob Riis, a Dane, who took the photography of the foul core of New York City slums. A tenement life around 1900. Tenement Museum in New York City is a good place to go visit. But this was miserable life and wretchedness. From the New York Post, 1898, newspaper reports on the Lower East Side of New York, Little Israel. Could they become white? The neighborhood where these people live is absolutely impassable. They claim to have been driven out of Poland and Russia. The neighborhood is the eyesore of New York City, perhaps the filthiest place on the Western continent. A Christian could not live there because he will be driven out by the stench and the dirt. Cleanliness is an unknown quantity to these people. They cannot be lifted up to a higher plane because they do not want to be. That's eugenics. They're incapable of being elevated. That's the way it is. That's the way the language was, and that was the way the New York Tribune saw it. Little Italy, hopeless to think of civilizing them. They are extremely ignorant. Jeff, don't take it personally. Extremely ignorant, have been reared in the belief that brigandage is a manly occupation, that assassination is the natural sequence of the most trivial quarrel. They are miserably poor, and it is not strange that they resort to theft and robbery. It is perhaps hopeless to think of civilizing them. So eugenics and testimony and the academic departments, the new psych departments, social relations departments, this was what they were writing about. This is what they were generally. And immigrants were bringing unwanted ideas. That like Tevye's daughters, they were tough. They were anarchists, some of them. Socialists, many. Bernie Sanders' great-great-great-grand people were that. There's a memory of that, too. So the bookkeepers, stenographers, accountants, union, and it started in shirtwaist triangle, shirtwaist fire, organizing against child labor. That's Yiddish, that's English, but these are kids. Child labor was still big in the United States in the 1890s, 1900. Violence. The Los Angeles Times building was blown up in 1910 by 2 Irish terrorists. 20 people were killed. It's not new. We just don't remember it. I mean, the Los Angeles Times building blown up. 20 people killed. The New York Stock Exchange was blown up by terrorists in 1920. 30 people were killed, all young messengers. So we've always had urban terrorism in the United States. It's not, and much of it is homegrown terrorism. Now, the counter-evolution was starting. The Immigration Restriction League was founded in 1894 at Harvard, the triumph of academic eugenics and the vocabulary of testing. Keep certain people out. Get them out. We don't want them. But the labor movement, even though it was far to the left, labor, we still needed cheap labor, so it was still coming in. This was the preamble of the Immigration Restriction League. It says, you may not be able to read it, but the object, have I got it? Yeah. The object of the League shall be to advocate and work for the further judicious restriction or restriction regulation of immigration. To, what's that say? Documents and circulars, solicit facts and information and on the subject, hold public hear meetings, and to arouse public opinion to the accuracy of a further exclusion of elements undesirable for citizenship or unjust or injury to the national character. So it's, again, this is 1920. This led directly to the restrictive immigration law. But Yiddish newspapers, foreign languages, still exploding all over the place. Within 50 years, they were all gone, because the door had shut. Letters to the editor, written in foreign language, this one in Yiddish. She wrote in English, she wrote in Yiddish, but I translated it. Dear editor, I have 4 little children, my husband has abandoned me, I speak no English, and I'm all alone in this country. Please help me. She wrote this to the Jewish Forward, the Yiddish Vorwärts newspaper. That's how the letters to the editor started, by desperate people writing letters to help their editor. And so the people were miserable. It was poor, wretched. The women were being abandoned. But yet, Yiddish and Italian newspapers were flourishing in 1905. Foreign languages were in this people. And yet, in spite of that, assimilation is on the road. A hit tune, Long Live America. You know, it's the same way why 90%, 95% of the Muslim immigrants in the United States are super patriots. The overwhelming number of Jews and Italians who came into this country loved America. They wanted nothing to do except become more American. So this hit tune, Long Live America, in Yiddish, they got a picture of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, the Statue of Liberty, and the song is in both English on the left, or transliterated with English letters, and Yiddish on the right, because language was already in a state of flux. And it was, how else did these people get out? Sports, and prize fighting, baseball, particularly for the Irish and the Germans. Baseball, John McGraw, Connie Mack, Honus Wagner, Lou Gehrig, Babe Ruth, they were German. Gehrig only spoke German at home. But Benny Leonard, whose name was Benjamin Leiner, a Jewish kid, lightweight. The Jewish kids were often smaller, and they would punch their way out of it. But he was lightweight champion, born 1896 in the United States. Barney Ross, Berdov Rozovsky, Chicago, lightweight champion, born 1909. These are the first generation born in this country. So these are the kids who are making it in America. Tough, little, if you do it, you're either a prize fighter or you got a gun in your hand. Tony Canzaneri, Italian, born 1908, 3 titles. These guys were the great prize fighters of that generation. Jewish basketball players, the Philadelphia Swaz, South Philadelphia Hebrew Association, a whole bunch of basketball players named Goldberg, who they were short, so they had to get the ball over the hands of the taller Gentiles. What did they invent? The jump shot. So they invented the jump shot. But they were the great basketball players of the time. It took one more generation, born in 1911, for them to get into baseball. 2 icons. The Jew was Hank Greenberg, right? And he took it like everybody else took it. You're a Sheeny, you're a Kike, you're a whatever their name they wanted to call him. He had a very short fuse, Greenberg, but he also had rabbit ears. He heard everything, nothing bothered him until the game was over. Then he would walk into the opposing dugout with a bat in his hand, clubhouse say, he was 6'5", 215 pounds. Who called me a Jew bastard? Just stand up. Nobody stood up. Nobody stood up. So Greenberg was powerful. DiMaggio just took it. But he was called the Big Dago. You know, the Big Wop. Everybody insulted everybody. It was part of it. So you could only imagine what it was going to be like for Jackie Robinson when he came in, because they insulted each other. It was simply the nature. But by the 30s, DiMaggio and Greenberg, Jews and Italians were coming in. Where else were you making a living? Crime. It had to be. So the legacy of Little Israel, Bugsy Siegel, born in Brooklyn, 1906. Meyer Lansky was born in Russia, 1902, but they were buddies growing up on the street. They dated each other's sisters. They married each other. They made crime together. Lucky Luciano, born in 1897 in Sicily, came over with a little kid. So these guys made it together. And they formed an organization called Murder Incorporated. They organized crime. Who got the job of doing all the killing? The Jews. Murder Incorporated was 90% Jewish. Very rarely did you get murdered on a Friday night into Sabbath. That's true. They didn't kill you. But there was a guy named Red Levine, an Orthodox Jewish killer from St. Louis, who never killed you on the Sabbath. Friday night, you were dead. Saturday night, you were chopped liver already. So it's simply the way it was. The doors finally shut. And Sacco and Vanzetti, 1920, the national origins and restrictive immigration and illegal immigration started immediately. What did these two guys do? They held up a paymaster in Braintree, Massachusetts, allegedly, and 2 guys got killed, and that was it. Nobody else could handle it. The rage in the country got so large and that the restrictive immigration people finally won the day, and there was not going to stop them. By the time they were executed in 1927, all the restrictive immigration laws had been passed. Also, academic eugenics. The 8-1 Supreme Court decision that said, voted in 1927, morons and imbeciles is legal language. This is a new book by Adam Cohen, The Supreme Court, American Eugenics, Sterilization of Carrie Buck. That was also the reason for keeping Jews out. The testimony that was made on Jews and Italians coming into Ellis Island was that 50% of them were mentally retarded. That was what a Johns Hopkins psychologist said, a testimony, and it made the law. These people made the law in 1925 that shut the door. And the door stayed shut basically till now. It's still shut. But assimilation started. So the door shut in 1924, tight. We shut the door on immigration. And what happens? The Jews who are here, they got to make it. The little kids are going to make it. And yet America is different. We may be a country of prejudice and color, but you can get your bag, pack it, walk across a bridge and find yourself where? In Long Island. My God. So 1883, all of these bridges were built from the 1880s on, the Manhattan Bridge 1905, Brooklyn and beyond. The door is still open, 1905, but Queensboro Bridge built in 1909, Queens then and now. What's Queens now? With the door open somewhat, a little bit more. It's as ethnic as you can get it. Queens is maybe the most diverse neighborhood in the United States right now. After the doors closed, from the ghetto to suburbia, the path to assimilation, the educational meritocracy of the 1930s, the people couldn't get in. Tufts had its quota of 1922. Harvard was the first to have a quota on Jews and Italians, 1922. 2 weeks later, Yale did it, and about 3 weeks later, President Cousins did it also. We had a quota at Tufts from 1922 to about 1957. Nils Wessel took the quota off. And the quotas ended, and then it was a meritocracy. Up until that time, in the 1930s, 80% of Harvard's entering students came from 6 prep schools. So it was no meritocracy, and America wasn't going anywhere. I mean, what was our higher education? It was the Marx Brothers and Horse Feathers, Knute Rockne, All-American, and June Allison and Peter Lawford in Good News. We were trivial and nothing. If it weren't for the fact that Hitler destroyed the European system, we never would have gotten to where we are. But we got there because we started letting in immigrants, Szilard, Einstein, Fermi. We built the bomb, won the war, and took off. And now we're dealing with immigration. But the memory of it, the path to meritocracy. Now the last Protestant is holding on by his fingertips to Montauk Point, trying desperately to hold on. Because they keep coming. Immigrant. You got everybody in Queens. They ain't going to stop because they're going to prosper and they'll make it. So here's the picture of what immigration was like. 1920 to 50, the door is shut. College quotas, Nobel Prizes were going to the Germans. When the war ended, we started letting the immigrant scientists in and we started winning Nobel Prizes. Up until 1933, the Nobel Prizes were wholly owned German subsidiaries. We started getting in. Now, of the 350 Nobel Law Prizes, about 150 are from, that we won, 150 are foreign-born. So we learned what to do with the foreign-born. Okay, last slide. Where are we today as a nation of immigrants? What's this debate going to be like? Nobody's going to speak the truth. You'll leave and you'll know what's going on. Who wants to come? Some Muslims, but not the vast majority. I mean, Muslims not going to be a majority. It's going to be any miserable, wretched refugee. Maybe some Syrians. Some of those Syrians are going to be Christians. So it's going to be everybody. Anybody who is desperate is going to come and try to get into the country. And if they can't get, you can't get in legally, you'll get in illegally. Illegal immigration is as American as apple pie. I got relatives who came in illegally after 24. It's always been. Italians poured into this country. So it's more poor and wretched, desperate people willing to send their children, sell their children across shark-infested waters, sell their children into white slavery, sell their children into pornography. They'll do anything to get 7 out of 10 in. And that's why you have this explosion of pornography. What's different? The race issue is the same. Americans basically think of themselves as a country that is white. The Trump phenomenon is white people discontented. It's white people who say, who the hell are all these people of color that are coming in? That's one of the issues, and that's as American as apple pie too. That's simply the way it is. So deal with it as best you want, and I don't care because we're retiring. That's it. The race issue, the biggest business in the world, by the way, is not arms, it's not even drugs, it's human trafficking. That's where the money is, human trafficking, and that's not going to stop. Show me, when McLean was running for president, he said, you can't stop these people. He said 2 things, and nobody paid any attention to him. He said, the jobs that are lost are not coming back. They're not coming back. Technology has wiped out many, and some went to poor countries, but not many. Technology is, we have factories running 24 hours a day in the dark. Technology is changing everything. And then he also said, show me a 50-foot fence, and I'll show you a 51-foot ladder. You cannot stop people who want to come in to the country that they say is home, is hope. And that's us. We're hope. Some things never change. A white rebellion, be like us or else. And then you got the presidential candidates playing it up. I put this together before there were only 2 or 3 or 4 left, or 3 left. But it's still the issues. Listen carefully, listen to who everybody is speaking to, and then you'll be more educated than you were before this hour. Thank you very much. Okay. All right.